Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Janmadhyasya Yato Anvayaditaratascha Artheshu Abhigyaswarat Tene Brahmahridaya Adikavaye Muhyanti Yat Surayah Tejo Vari Mridam Yatha Vinimayo Yatra Trisargo Mrisha Dhamna Svena Sada Nirastakuhakam Satyam Param Dhimahi Nigamakalpataror Galitam Phalam Shukamukadamrita Dravasanyutam Pibata Bhagavatam Rasamalayam Muhuraho Rasika Bhuvi Bhavukaha. So now we enter the 11th chapter of the 7th Skandha of Srimad Bhagavatam. We have concluded the glorious story of Prahalad, and now, after that is over, Narada also narrated a story about Lord Shiva burning the three cities Tripura, and now we begin the 11th chapter. Having heard all these narratives, which was so wonderful, especially the story of Prahalad, which was so exalted, Yudhishthira, who was the main listener there, his mind completely fixed on the Lord, he inquired of Narada further. He said, O Narada, O great divine sage, Devarishi, I am anxious to hear about the Dharma, which is the eternal Dharma, Sanatana Dharma. He says, Shrotum ichhami nrinam dharmam sanatanam, varnashrama acharayutam, yat puman vindate param. So he says, I want to know about Sanatana Dharma, the eternal Dharma, which is of course made of the four Varnas and four ashramas, and the details of all of that, by which one can reach the supreme abode, that is realized perfection of life. And then Yudhishthira also says, because you are the son of Brahma, he addresses Narada, you being the son of Brahma, and you perfect in your austerities and your meditation and everything, you are the best person to expound on the secret of Dharma. So he says, O kind-hearted, pious sage, only someone like you, only a sage like you who is very tranquil and completely surrendered to the Lord, to Narayana, he can know the highest meaning of Dharma, the subtle meaning of Dharma. Therefore, please be kind to share it with us. He says, Narayana Paravipra Dharmam Guhyam Param Viduhu. Only those who are surrendered to the Supreme Lord Narayana, they know the secret of Dharma, the subtle intricacies of Dharma, because it's a very complex topic. So Narada now begins his narration on Dharma. This will be covering multiple chapters for the rest of this Skandha, because this is also a very important topic, having given the story of Prahalada, which of course demonstrates the highest Dharma, which is to be the completely surrendered devotee of the Lord. Now Narada describes the Dharma that takes one to that state, because the ultimate perfection of life is to reach the state of Prahalad, being completely surrendered with unconditional love for the Supreme Being and for all beings of the universe. And the process to realize the true love, which is our very nature, is also Dharma. So, that Dharma which leads us to the realization of the highest Dharma is Sanatana Dharma. And that's what Narada now is going to describe over the next few chapters in detail. It's a very wonderful discourse on Dharma. So Narada begins and says, first, as always, he offers his obeisance to the Supreme Being, to the Lord, before he starts speaking. He says, Natva Bhagavate Ajaya Lokanam Dharma Hetave Vakshe Sanatanam Dharmam Narayana Mukhat Shrutam. So he says, first I offer my obeisances to Bhagavan, who is the unborn, Bhagavate Ajaya, the unborn Lord. And now I speak on the true meaning of Sanatana Dharma. Sanatana Dharmam Vakshiya. I speak on the Sanatana Dharma, which is for the glory and for the benefit of the whole of mankind. And I do that as I listen to from Narayana. He says Narayana, who also manifested as a sage in Badrinath, along with his part manifestation Nara. We saw this briefly mentioned in the beginning of the fourth Skandha, that Nara and Narayana are the avatars born through Dharma and Murti, Murti being the daughter of Daksha, and they are practicing austerities in Badrinath for the welfare of people. So, Narayana and his part manifestation Nara are also descended as the sages Nara Narayana, and from this Narayana, the sage Narayana, Narada says, I listened to the true meaning of Dharma in Badrinath and I shall tell you about it. So he first begins by saying, the essence of all Dharma, the source of all Dharma is Bhagavan himself. Dharma Moolam hi Bhagavan, Sarva Veda Mayo Harihi, the Supreme Lord Hari, who is the embodiment of all the Vedas, all knowledge, all scriptures, all wisdom. He is the source of Dharma. So one has to understand that all Dharma is so that the true self, which is our essence as pure spirit, which is non different from the Supreme Spirit, realizes its true natural position of peace, happiness, and unconditional love. That which makes the self realize its true nature as Satchit Ananda, as ever abiding, ever fully aware, and ever blissful. That is the true Dharma, that which makes the self realize its true nature, which is non different from the Supreme Spirit, which is Hari. That is true Dharma. And now Narada says that is, first of all, proclaimed as consisting of 30 features, he says. The highest virtue for all beings, by which the soul of the universe, which is the Lord, is pleased. So essentially, it is all for ensuring that the self of the universe, Akila Atma, which is Bhagavan, who is situated in the hearts of all beings, when that awakening happens by which one loses attachment with matter, with identification with body and mind as I and mine, and thereby one realizes one's natural constitutional position as pure spirit, as pure Atma, which is non different from the Atma of the whole universe, which is the Lord. Only then true Dharma is manifested. And Narada says that is manifested through 30 virtues. He says there are 30 features. It's a very long list, very important list. Narada first gives 30 features. He says truthfulness, compassion, austerity, purity. These are the first four. Satyam, Daya, Tapaha, Shaucham, Titiksha, endurance. We can add that to 5. So the first 5 are truthfulness, compassion, austerity, purity, and endurance of all dualities. That is, endurance of heat and cold, pleasure and pain, and so on. So these 5, Satyam, Daya, Tapah, Shaucham, Titiksha, they are the first 5. They set the ground. Then he gives the next, which is Iksha, Shamo, Damo, Ahimsa, Brahmacharya. So he says that is, Iksha is discernment, discernment between what's right and what's wrong, what's eternal and what's impermanent. That's number 6. Number 7 is control of the mind, Shamaha. Number 8 is control of the senses, Dhamma. Number 9 is Ahimsa or non-violence, which is to not engage in any violence unless necessary. And the 10th is Brahmacharyam, which is continence, which is to preserve one's energy and not be flippant about it. That is to say, to maintain one's sexual energy and regulate it properly. That's Brahmacharya. Then the next 5 are charity, study of scriptures, being honest, being content, and serving all with the same eye. Tyagaha, Swadhyaya, Arjavam, Santoshaha, Samadrik Seva. These are again very essential for bringing forth Dharma, being very honest, straightforward, being disposed to charity, that is, disposed to giving to those who need things. And the highest charity, of course, is to give wisdom. And then Swadhyaya, which is to study the scriptures such as Bhagavatam and Gita and so on. Santosham, which is contentment. And Samadrik Seva means serving everyone with the same eye, not serving with a partiality and so on, serving with the same eye. Then the next five are withdrawing from mundane activity gradually, not suddenly, but gradually withdraw oneself from mundane activity, because the mundane activities, whatever is necessary to earn bread, for instance, may go on, but to engage in activities which are unnecessary, for instance, to earn money beyond what's reasonably necessary, and to keep oneself busy beyond what is reasonably necessary, and to engage in entertainment activities which are unnecessary, all this has to be slowly withdrawn. So he says, gradually withdrawing from mundane activity, pondering the contrary result of men's action. So men always engage in actions desiring one thing, but they get the opposite. People engage in activities desiring pleasure, but they get suffering. They engage in activities desiring love, but they get suffering instead, and so on. So, the contrary result of men's actions, refraining from useless talk, being silent unless there is something useful to talk about, inquiring into the self, and equitable distribution among all beings. That is, to be generous and give equally to all beings whatever they deserve. These are the next five. Maunam is one of them, as we saw, which is the stopping the propensity to unnecessarily speak, and speak only that which is useful and of value. And then all the other things we saw, that is gradually withdrawing from mundane activity, pondering the contrary result of actions of men, desiring pleasure in this impermanent world, and so on, self inquiry, and equitable distribution. The next five are regarding all beings as one's own self, that is, to see that everyone is having the same essence, everyone is essentially the pure spirit, Satchit Ananda, and therefore there is no difference. And everyone's outer activities, the body, mind, and intellect, are also the same energy of the Supreme Lord. The Prakriti of three gunas is what manifesting as the body, mind, intellect activities of all beings, even though it's diverse in the sense that it is never the same between two people, but it is still essentially the energy, Prakriti of the Lord. And the essence, the true identity of all beings, is exactly the same, which is pure self. Then, once one recognizes this, then Narada moves to the higher order dharma, which is what Prahalada said, which is Shravanam, Kirtanam, Smaranam, and so on. That is Shravanam, which is listening to the glories of the Lord, chanting the glories of the Lord, dwelling on the names and glories and remembering Him, serving Him, worshipping Him, bowing down to the deity and to also seniors, offering the spirit of the service spirit, that is, offering the fruits of all actions as a service, and treating the Lord as one's own friend, and dedicating oneself to the Lord. So the last nine are exactly what Prahalada said, which is Shravanam, Kirtanam, Vishnu Smaranam, Padasevanam, Archanam, Vandanam, Dasyam, Sakyam, Atmanivedanam. So these nine, which is what Prahalada mentioned, Prahalada is naturally situated in those higher order dharma virtues, dharmic virtues, which are the nine, which he mentioned as the 9 ways of devotion, which are listening to the glories of the Lord, speaking and singing about the glories of the Lord, remembering Him, and serving His lotus feet, which is to serve the devotees who are surrendered to Him, worshipping Him in through His symbols and especially the name, and offering obeisances to Him in the form of a deity, or to the senior devotees, the great bhaktas and jnanis, and having the attitude of service, dasyam like Hanuman, that is, be always ready to serve with enthusiasm in especially speaking and glorifying the Supreme Being and telling everyone about the truth of their own self, which is the same as the Supreme Being, and Sakyam, which is to treat the Lord as one's own dear friend, and finally Atma Nivedana, which is to surrender one's body, mind, and soul to the Supreme Lord, accepting everything as His will. So these 9 are the last 9, but it requires the platform of the first 21. So they are all very important, and without that, one cannot come directly to these 9. So it's always very important to be in the platform of, as Narada said, truthfulness, compassion, purity, discernment, control of mind and senses, straightforwardness and honesty, contentment, not engaging in unnecessary mundane activities, being silent. All these he mentioned, the 21, are the platform upon which the last 9 come about, and they make the 30. Now, after giving this Narada, once one is established in this, then one gets the highest perfection of life. And there also, there are different Varnas and ashramas given. Here, Krishna has already described this beautifully in the Bhagavad Gita. In the 4th chapter, he says, Chaturvarnyam maya shrishtam guna karma vibhagacha. So he says, I have created the 4 Varnas and 4 ashramas based on the guna and karma. Guna karma vibhagacha. That is, guna means attributes or qualities and karma means activities. So based on one's natural disposition, propensities and activities, one naturally falls into one of 4 varnas. Varna means frequency. One can say varna is description. Actually, when in Sanskrit, when we say we give the varnan of something, we are describing that. So varna means the frequency or the description of a person, and ashrama is the stage of life. So ashrama is 4, which is brahmacharya, the student life; grihastha, the householder life; vanaprastha, the recluse, one who is retired, that is from householder life; and sannyasa, the renunciate life. These are the 4 ashramas, and the 4 varnas are Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya and Shudra. So Brahmana is the one who is disposed toward learning and toward self-inquiry and so on. Kshatriya is the one who is disposed toward maintaining order and administration and having a martial spirit and so on. Vaishya is the one who is disposed towards wealth accumulation, starting businesses, doing agriculture and running various businesses and so on. And Shudra is the one who is disposed towards service. He serves the other 3 activities. So whoever is engaged in serving the other 3, he is a Shudra. So now, Narada beautifully having described this, this is why Narada makes it very clear that none of this is based on birth. It is all based on one's propensities, as Krishna also has beautifully described in the Gita. So Narada says these are the 4 Varnas, as we said. And the first 3 are called Dvijas, Brahmanas, Kshatriyas and Vaishyas, because they are engaged in activities which are very essential, and the 4th, which is the Shudras, are supporting the first 3. So the first 3, they engage in activities which are either the Brahmanas engaging in learning and teaching and spreading wisdom, Kshatriyas who are engaged in providing order, government, administration and all that, and Vaishyas who are engaged in wealth creation. These are the 3 essential aspects of society. You need wisdom, you need order, and you need wealth. So these are the 3 that they provide, and the Shudras are serving the 3. So Narada says the essential quality of Brahmana is that he has to perform sacrifices, he has to study Vedas, he has to engage in charity. He in fact lists 6 of them. 3 are mandatory, which is performing sacrifices, engaging in study, and engaging in also charity, which is to give the wisdom, especially share the wisdom free if possible, and also give whatever one has. And then on top of that, optionally, he can officiate as a priest. He can also make money as a teacher, and he can also receive gifts for whatever he is doing. So these are the six that are the duties of Brahmana. A Kshatriya, a ruler, is supposed to protect the people. He is supposed to give maintenance, and his own maintenance is done by recovering taxes and fines. So he is not expected to receive gifts and so on. So this is very important, because today we see the opposite, where the rulers are getting gifts, which are bribes essentially, and they are currying favors based on who's gifting them. Here specifically, Narada beautifully says the rulers are barred from getting gifts. They ought not to receive any gifts. They only have to get their money by recovering taxes and fines, and the government pays them based on the taxes and fines. And also, it says very importantly that the Brahmanas, that is the one who are truly engaged in the activities of wisdom, ought not to be taxed. So, in other words, it's a beautiful system where the wealth creators, Vaishyas, are taxed appropriately, not exceedingly, so that they are penalized for wealth creation as some countries do. Appropriate taxes are levied on wealth creators so that that wealth can be used for maintenance of the state and for providing for the Brahmanas who are engaged in learning and in spreading wisdom. So, this is the order of society, and that is exactly what Narada beautifully describes here. So, he says, a Vaishya, therefore, the businessman, he engages in trading, he engages in agriculture. He is also meant to protect cattle because they are very essential for the prosperity of society, to have cows who can give good milk, because it's so important for the health of the society to maintain healthy cows, and then engage in trade, and then lend money for those who need money to be loaned towards, and so on. So all these activities, banking activities, loans, trading activities, and then creating businesses, entrepreneurship, all that is being done is the activity of Vaishya. And then the Shudra is the one who serves any of them. So it's very clear here, once very important to recognize that these activities define the classes and not birth. So today we have a very perverse situation where people who are engaged in entrepreneurship, or engaged in trading, or engaged in banking, or even worse, they are engaged in simply serving others. That is, they are working for those who are doing banking or doing companies, and effectively, therefore, they are being Shudras, and yet they call themselves Brahmanas because of their birth. The reality is, Narada very clearly says that while one's birth can predispose one towards certain tendencies, it is the manifest qualities and activities, guna, karma, that determines what one's Varna is. So, if one's Varna is not keeping with the activities and the qualities that are described for that Varna, then one cannot call oneself that. And therefore, Narada says here very beautifully, as we saw, the ones who are engaged in study, performance of sacrifices, teaching, and so on are Brahmanas. The ones who are engaged in protecting the state and collecting money only through taxes and fines are Kshatriyas. The ones who are engaged in business, agriculture, trading, banking, and so on are Vaishyas. And the ones who serve these three are Shudras. So one can figure out for oneself based on this what is one's position, not based on one's birth. So then Narada says that after this, he gives certain conditions. He says the in the times of distress, one can engage in other activities. For instance, it is said here that sometimes there are allowances given for Brahmanas to engage in agriculture or in breeding of cattle, and similarly for Kshatriyas can engage in learning. So those allowances are given, though their primary qualities are described. Having said that, it is said that for a true Brahmana, that is one who is committed to learning, the preferred way is to accept only money that comes on its own as gifts for his learning. The less preferred way is to accept gifts by asking for anything. So, ideally, one ought not to ask for any money, and whatever comes on its own is accepted with gratitude. Otherwise, one asks for money, but never does it say that one can engage in activities which are completely not befitting one. So, for example, it says here that one can engage in certain activities, but one cannot engage in working for the um, Vaishyas or the Kshatriyas and call oneself a Brahmana. It is said very clearly here that if one is uh, engaged in service to those who belong to a lower grade, then that's called a very low form of living. And we have to understand here that the lower grade or the higher grade is based on one's activities. So the highest grade of living is the one who is engaged in self inquiry, in learning, in disseminating wisdom. And that is what one has to aspire toward, and that's available to everyone. Then comes the Kshatriya spirit, which is the one who is disposed towards administration and so on. And then comes the uh, wealth creation. So today we have a perverse situation again where wealth creators are worshipped, businessmen are worshipped, and everyone wants to be a billionaire or a multimillionaire, and that seems to be the model that is presented as successful life where one can have maximum sense gratification and pleasures. And the way described as a Brahmana, which is the one who lives very simply, not even charging anything, accepting whatever gifts comes on their own, and living a very simple life, content, and freely distributing wisdom and engaged in study, that is looked down upon. So, and the what is makes it even more perverse is those who call themselves Brahmanas engage in the activities of the so-called lower grades, which is to either focus on wealth creation or even worse, serve those who are engaged in wealth creation, which is the attitude of a Shudra. So Narada very clearly says here that that is not to be accepted and call oneself simply by the birth. And then finally, he says, what are the qualities of the four classes as well, very nicely. He says, if you call yourself a Brahmana, you have to have these qualities. What are they? He says, control of mind, control of senses, austerity, purity, contentment. So, among the 30 qualities we saw, they are essential for Brahmanas especially. So, he says, Shama, Dama, Tapa, Shaucham, Santosham, Kshanti, Arjavam, Jnanam, Daya, Achyutatmavam Satyam Cha Brahma Lakshanam. He says control of mind, control of senses, austerity, purity, contentment, forgiveness, honesty, wisdom, compassion, and total devotion to the Supreme Lord Achyuta or Krishna. This is the quality of a Brahmana. So if one is situated in these qualities alone, one can call himself a Brahmana or herself. Then for a Kshatriya, he says a martial spirit, valor, fortitude, audacity, liberality, self control, forgiveness, devotion to Brahmanas, that is, those who are the wise ones, being benign and protecting the weak. See, these are the essential qualities of a Kshatriya or a ruler. So, if one aspires to be in the political class, in the ruling class, today, of course, we don't see any of this, hardly, but these are the qualities that are given as the essential qualities. It says Kshatra Lakshanam. What are they? Again, it's a martial spirit, valor and courage, fortitude, audacity, that is great confidence and ability to pursue a vision, self control, not indulging oneself in pleasures using the perks of power, forgiveness, and devotion to the sagely beings, to the Brahmanas, and protection of the weak. These are the qualities of Kshatriya. And for the Vaishyas, that is the business class, what are the qualities given? It's devotion to God, again, that's very important. Devotion to one's Guru, surrender to the Supreme Lord Vishnu, and always engaging in wealth creation only in a dharmic way. That is, one cannot engage in wealth creation through hook or crook, but only in a dharmic way. Constant exertion, being able to work hard. So, those are the people who are truly Vaishyas, and there are many of this nature even seen today who are the founders of startups and who form big companies, who engage in banking, trading. It is just that they are all Vaishyas, that's their quality. And as we noted before, it is odd when someone who is just by birth a Brahmana but is engaged in these activities, he cannot call himself a Brahmana because these are the qualities of a Vaishya: wealth creation, constant exertion, working hard, being very skillful, dexterous, but most importantly, two things which are not found today as much. One is complete surrender to the Supreme Lord and engaging in wealth creation only in keeping with Dharma. So these are the qualities of a Vaishya. And then finally, for Shudra, the ones who are engaged in serving. So they are only today the majority are in that category, those who simply earn a wage serving either the ruling class or most prominently the business class. So today what we see is a society where corporations are worshipped, and therefore vast majority of people are Shudras, in that they are employees or wage earners at the hands of businessmen. And so their qualities are given here as being pure, honest, never having any tendency to thieve anything, that is to steal anything, never steal anything, truthful, and always protect the cows, protect the Brahmanas. So these qualities are very essential for workers. Workers have to be truthful, honest, never steal, never usurp anything, and engage in honest labor and earn the money for the labor. That's what predominantly people do today. Though how honestly they do is something we don't know, but there are many who do that. And then finally, Narada also gives the duty of women in particular because they are so essential to society. Women, it is said, are the foundation of society because they raise children. They are the mothers for the next generation. They raise children. So Narada says it's the duty of a woman to be very humble, to serve the household, to be very devoted to her husband if the husband is very devoted himself. So it says very clearly that she is not obligated to serve a husband who is fallen. So if he is fallen in the sense that he is engaged in sinful activities, then there is no necessity for a wife to serve such a husband. But if a husband is pious himself, is living life according to dharma, and as we discussed now, he is clear in what his dharma is, and he engages in it honestly. So this is why Krishna says in the Gita, one has to know what one's dharma is and engage in it rather than try to do someone else's dharma. So we have to know what our propensities are and then engage in it honestly. If our propensity is towards wealth creation, engage in it in a righteous dharmic way. If our propensity is towards politics and power, engage in it again in a righteous way, not for gratification of oneself but as a service. And of course, if one's propensity is towards learning and towards inquiry and towards studying scriptures, then that's the highest order because that leads to perfection of life, and therefore then engage in it honestly. And if one is simply disposed to serving others, then serve honestly. So whatever one's dharma is, to do it honestly and clearly, such a man and a woman can form a good union. And that's what Narada says here, that if a man is living according to dharma, then the woman can also serve him and vice versa. And she can maintain the house very cleanly because women are normally predisposed to keeping things very clean. So they can, Narada says here, she can keep the house very clean and keep everything arranged beautifully. All the sense objects are maintained in a regulated way, what is necessary for the senses, and speak always the truth, being always loving and kind and very gentle and most importantly, seeing the Supreme Lord in everyone and especially in one's own spouse. So, these are the qualities of a good wife and a good husband, Narada says, and thereby he summarizes the quality of the four Varnas. And finally, he concludes by saying, and it's a very important point again to re emphasize, Narada says, if what has been declared to be a characteristic of a particular grade is perceived in someone else, then the latter should be called by that class. So Narada says, don't go by birth. If one is seen as having a martial spirit or having the propensity to rule or govern or go into politics, whatever his birth is, he has to be called a Kshatriya. If one's propensity is towards business, whatever his birth is, he has to be called a Vaishya and so on. So Narada again makes it very clear as the very last verse of this chapter that one has to be called by what one demonstrates as his qualities. What has been declared, if whatever is perceived in someone is similar to what has been declared as the qualities of a particular class, then he belongs to that class regardless of his birth. So it has to be very clear. So Narada describes all this beautifully. And with this chapter ends. As we said, there are multiple chapters on this discourse on Dharma by Narada. In the next chapter onward, Narada will describe the Dharma of ashramas. That is, we saw the Dharma of Varnas, the four grades, which are Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. Narada has given a very beautiful, clear discourse which is very beautifully open to all, unlike the corruption that has happened in Bharat, for example, where people simply claim heritage based on lineage and based on birth. Narada makes it very clear that the qualities matter and that's what distinguishes. So he clearly differentiates the qualities of the four classes, how the highest class of Brahmana is the one who is situated in the noblest virtues, and then the Kshatriyas and Vaishyas and Shudras, they have their own qualities. All of them at the base level are truthful, honest, dharmic, and content, and most importantly, surrendered to the Lord. And then they manifest different qualities. With this clarity and with the fact that this is what determines one's Varna and not birth, Narada concludes this beautiful discourse on Varnas. Now he will begin a discourse on ashrama, which is what determines one's student life, then householder life, then the life of a retired person, and then the renunciate. Those four stages will be described from next chapter onward. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.